The message came at 11:42 p.m., a short vibration on a phone that rarely received anything except business orders and death threats. But this one was different. It was from an unknown number, a child's number. "He's beating my mama. Please help." The Mafia boss, Matteo Ricci, stared at the screen. He frowned at first, thinking it was a mistake, a scam, a wrong number. Then another text arrived. Shorter, shakier. "I'm hiding. He said he'll kill her." Matteo's breath stilled. He had seen fear. He had caused fear, but he had never seen this. A child begging a stranger because she had no one else left. He typed only 3 words. "I'm on my way." No hesitation. No questions. No second thoughts. His men froze as he stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. "Boss, where are you going?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because something in that child's words, that trembling desperation, hit a part of him he thought had died years ago. As his car tore through the streets, another message appeared. "I hear footsteps. Please hurry." Matteo clenched the steering wheel. His pulse hammered. Lights blurred past. By the time he reached the address, he already knew. Tonight, he wasn't arriving as a Mafia boss. He was arriving as the only hope that little girl had left. And what he found inside that house changed everything. Stay with me until the end. Because what Matteo discovered in that living room will make your heart stop and start again. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Matteo Ricci had built his empire on one simple principle: trust no one, love nothing, feel nothing. For 23 years, he had ruled the streets of Boston with an iron fist wrapped in expensive Italian leather. His name alone could silence a room full of hardened criminals. His reputation had been carved from blood, betrayal, and the kind of calculated violence that kept weaker men awake at night. But sitting in his armored sedan, racing through empty streets toward an address he'd never seen, Matteo felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. The GPS announced 12 minutes to destination, 12 minutes for a little girl who might not have 12 seconds. His phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with another message that made his chest tighten. "I can't find Mama anymore. There's so much blood." Matteo pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine roared through the quiet neighborhood as streetlights streaked past like golden bullets. He had driven these same streets countless times before, but never like this. Never with the weight of genuine fear crushing his lungs. You see, Matteo Ricci wasn't supposed to care about random children texting wrong numbers. He wasn't supposed to care about anything except profit margins and territory expansion. But that night, speeding toward a crisis he couldn't control or manipulate, he found himself remembering things he had spent years trying to forget. 25 years earlier, Matteo had been a different man entirely. Back then, he went by his birth name, Michael Rodriguez. He lived in a cramped apartment with his younger sister Isabella and their mother Carmen. They were poor, but they were happy. Carmen worked double shifts at a textile factory, while Michael took care of Isabella after school. He helped her with homework, made her dinner, and tucked her into bed with stories about brave knights and rescued princesses. Isabella was 8 years old. She had dark curls that bounced when she laughed, and a smile that could light up their tiny kitchen on the coldest winter mornings. She believed her big brother could fix anything, solve any problem, chase away any monster hiding under her bed. One Thursday evening in November, Michael was working his part-time job at a local garage when the call came. His boss handed him the phone with a grim expression. The voice on the other end belonged to a police officer. There had been an incident at their apartment building. A domestic dispute in the unit next door had escalated into violence. Shots were fired through thin walls. Carmen and Isabella had been caught in the crossfire. Michael dropped everything and ran. He ran through streets that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. He ran past familiar corners that now seemed like tombstones marking the death of everything he had ever loved. When he reached the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt like interrogation lamps exposing every failure, every moment he hadn't been there to protect them. Carmen survived with minor injuries. Isabella did not. Michael held his little sister's hand as machines beeped around them like mechanical heartbeats counting down to silence. She looked so small in that hospital bed, so fragile, like a butterfly with broken wings. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about internal bleeding and trauma too severe for her tiny body to overcome. But before the machines went quiet, Isabella squeezed his hand one last time. She looked up at him with those same trusting eyes that had always believed he could fix anything. "Mikey," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. "Promise me you'll help other kids when they're scared." Michael promised. It was the last conversation they ever had. After the funeral, something fundamental shifted inside Michael Rodriguez. The part of him that believed in justice, in fairness, in the possibility that good people could live safe lives, died with Isabella. What emerged from that grief was colder, harder, more calculating. He realized that the police couldn't protect his family. The law couldn't save his sister. The system had failed everyone he loved, so Michael decided to become the system. He started small, running numbers for local bookmakers. He learned how power really worked in their neighborhood, who controlled what, where the real decisions got made. Within 5 years, he had transformed from grieving brother to feared enforcer. Within 10 years, he controlled 3 city blocks. Within 15 years, he owned half the waterfront. And somewhere along the way, Michael Rodriguez disappeared entirely. What remained was Matteo Ricci, a man who had built walls around his heart so thick that nothing could penetrate them. A man who had convinced himself that caring about anyone was a luxury he couldn't afford. Until tonight. The GPS announced 5 minutes to destination. Matteo's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Another text came through. This one was different. Weaker. "I think I'm going to sleep now. I'm really tired." That message hit Matteo like a physical blow. He recognized the tone immediately. He had heard it before in his sister's voice during those final hours. It was the sound of someone giving up, of a child's body shutting down from trauma and fear. "No," he said aloud to his empty car. "Not tonight. Not again." Matteo grabbed his phone and typed rapidly while steering with one hand. "Stay awake. Talk to me. What's your name?" The response came back slowly. "Emma. I'm Emma." "Emma, my name is Matt. I'm almost there. You need to stay awake for me. Can you do that?" "I'll try." "Good girl. Tell me about your mama." "What's her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Peterson. She makes the best chocolate chip cookies. She reads me stories every night." Matteo felt something crack inside his chest. This little girl, hiding in terror, was talking about bedtime stories and cookies. She was talking about the kind of normal, beautiful life that Isabella never got to finish living. The GPS announced 1 minute to destination. Matteo could see the address now, a small 2-story house with a broken porch light and overgrown hedges. Most of the windows were dark, but he could see flickering movement inside, shadows dancing against drawn curtains. He parked across the street and studied the scene. No police cars, no ambulance, no neighbors peering from windows. Whatever was happening inside that house, it was happening in complete isolation. Emma and her mother were facing this nightmare alone. Matteo checked his weapon, adjusted his jacket, and stepped out of the car. The night air was crisp and still. He could hear muffled sounds coming from inside the house. Shouting, something breaking, a woman's voice pleading. His phone buzzed one more time. Emma's message made his blood run cold. "He found me." Matteo moved toward the house like a predator stalking prey. But tonight the roles were reversed. Tonight, he was hunting something far more dangerous than rival gang members or corrupt politicians. He was hunting a monster who hurt children. The front door hung slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Matteo could hear Emma's attacker moving through the house, his heavy footsteps echoing against hardwood floors like thunderclaps in the silence. A man's voice, slurred with alcohol and rage, called out threats that made Mateo's jaw clench. "Come out, you little brat. You think you can hide from me forever?" Mateo's phone vibrated. Emma had sent one final message, just 2 words that nearly brought him to his knees. "Help Mama." He slipped through the front door without a sound. The house reeked of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and something else. Something metallic that Mateo recognized immediately. Blood. Fresh blood. The living room was a disaster zone. Furniture overturned. Picture frames shattered across the floor. Family photos torn and scattered like fallen leaves. In the center of it all lay Sarah Peterson, Emma's mother. She was unconscious, her blonde hair matted with blood, her breathing shallow and labored, but she was alive. Mateo knelt beside her, checking her pulse with the same gentle touch he had once used to comfort Isabella. Sarah's heartbeat was weak but steady. She had taken a brutal beating, but she would survive if she got medical attention soon. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The man was getting closer to wherever Emma was hiding. Mateo could hear him yanking open doors, cursing when he found empty closets and bathrooms. "I know you're in here somewhere, you little pest. When I find you, you're gonna wish you never picked up that phone." Mateo rose slowly. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash 23 years of controlled violence. This wasn't business anymore. This wasn't about territory or respect or fear. This was personal in a way that reached down to the broken parts of his soul and demanded justice. The attacker appeared at the end of the hallway. He was a big man, probably 6'3", with arms like tree trunks and hands stained with Sarah's blood. His name was Derek Walsh, though Mateo didn't know that yet. What Mateo could see immediately was the kind of cowardly brutality that targeted the helpless, the vulnerable, the innocent. Derek froze when he saw Mateo standing in his living room. For a moment, confusion flickered across his drunken features. This wasn't what he expected to find. This wasn't a neighbor or a police officer or some concerned citizen who would back down when threatened. This was something else entirely. "Who the hell are you?" Derek slurred, swaying slightly on his feet. "This ain't your business, pal. Get out of my house before I throw you out." Mateo said nothing. He simply studied Derek with the same cold calculation he had once used to evaluate business rivals before destroying them. He cataloged weaknesses, measured distances, calculated exactly how much force would be required to neutralize this threat permanently. "I said get out!" Derek roared, stumbling forward with his fists raised. Mateo moved like lightning striking water. One moment Derek was charging toward him. The next he was flat on his back with Mateo's hand wrapped around his throat. The speed and precision of the takedown was surgical, professional, terrifying in its efficiency. "Listen very carefully," Mateo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to ask you one question, and your life depends on giving me the right answer. Where is the little girl?" Derek's eyes bulged as he struggled against Mateo's grip. He tried to speak, but only managed choking sounds. Mateo loosened his hold just enough to allow words. "I don't know what you're talking about." Derek gasped. Wrong answer. Mateo's grip tightened again, this time with enough pressure to make Derek's vision start to fade around the edges. "Let me rephrase that. Emma Peterson, 8 years old, blonde hair, probably hiding somewhere in this house while you terrorized her and beat her mother unconscious. Where is she?" The mention of Emma's name seemed to penetrate Derek's alcohol-soaked brain. His expression shifted from confusion to something approaching fear. Not fear of Mateo, not yet, but fear that his secret was exposed. "She's probably upstairs," he wheezed. "Look, man, this is all a misunderstanding. Sarah's my girlfriend. We had a fight. Things got out of hand. But Emma's not even my kid. I was just trying to discipline her." Mateo's other hand moved to his jacket. Derek's eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of the weapon holstered there. Suddenly, the gravity of his situation became crystal clear. "Please," Derek whispered. "I didn't mean for things to go this far." "Neither did I," Mateo replied. But before he could make his next move, a small voice called out from upstairs, weak, frightened, but unmistakably alive. "Matt? Is that you?" Emma. She had remembered the name he gave her in their text conversation. She was calling for him like he was some kind of hero, some kind of savior who could make all the monsters go away. Mateo felt something shift inside his chest. The same crack that had started in his car widened into a fissure that threatened to split his carefully constructed walls completely open. "I'm here, Emma," he called back. "You're safe now? Come down when you're ready." Derek tried to struggle beneath Mateo's grip, but it was like trying to move a mountain. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "That kid's been nothing but trouble since her dad died. Sarah can't control her. Someone has to teach her respect." "Respect?" Mateo's voice carried the kind of deadly calm that had preceded some of his most violent business decisions. "You want to talk about respect?" He leaned closer, his face inches from Derek's. "Let me tell you about respect. Respect is what a child should feel when she's safe in her own home. Respect is what a mother should expect when she's trying to protect her daughter. Respect is what you should have shown before you decided to terrorize a family." Footsteps on the stairs. Light. Hesitant, but growing closer. Emma was coming down to meet the stranger who had answered her desperate plea for help. Mateo made a decision that would haunt Derek Walsh for the rest of his considerably shortened life. He hauled the man to his feet and dragged him toward the kitchen, out of Emma's line of sight. What happened next would determine whether Derek lived to see another sunrise, but it wouldn't happen in front of a traumatized child. "Emma," Mateo called over his shoulder, "stay with your mama. I'm going to call an ambulance. Everything's going to be okay now." As he pushed Derek into the kitchen, Mateo caught his first glimpse of Emma Peterson. She stood at the bottom of the stairs like a ghost, her small frame trembling in pajamas decorated with cartoon unicorns. Her blonde hair was tangled, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that no child should ever experience. But she was alive. She was breathing. She was looking at him with the same trusting expression Isabella had worn all those years ago. "Thank you for coming," Emma whispered. Those 5 words nearly destroyed Mateo completely, because in that moment, he realized that this wasn't about revenge or justice or settling scores. This was about keeping a promise he had made to a dying 8-year-old girl 25 years ago. This was about helping other kids when they were scared. The kitchen door swung shut behind them, and Derek Walsh found himself face to face with a man who had just remembered what it felt like to have something worth protecting. In the kitchen, away from Emma's innocent eyes, Derek Walsh discovered what it meant to face a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The fluorescent light above flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting shadows that danced across Derek's terrified face. Mateo pressed Derek against the kitchen counter with surgical precision. Every movement was calculated, controlled, purposeful. This wasn't the wild rage of a street thug or the desperate violence of someone fighting for survival. This was the methodical application of force by a man who had perfected the art of making people disappear. "You have 30 seconds to explain yourself," Mateo said, his voice so quiet it was almost conversational. "And I suggest you choose your words very carefully, because they might be the last ones you ever speak." Derek's hands shook as he tried to form words. The alcohol that had fueled his earlier brutality now worked against him, making his thoughts sluggish and his tongue thick. "Look, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the whole situation here. Enlighten me. Sarah's been seeing me for 6 months. Ever since her husband died in that car accident, she's been a mess. Can't control the kid, can't pay her bills, can't keep the house together. I've been helping her out, giving her money, fixing things around here, trying to be a father figure to Emma." Mateo's expression never changed, but Derek could sense something shifting in the air around them, something dangerous building like pressure before a storm. "Go on," Mateo said. "Tonight was different. Sarah had been drinking, and we got into an argument about Emma's behavior. The kid's been acting out ever since her dad died, talking back, refusing to do chores, staying out past curfew. Sarah asked me to help discipline her, but when I tried to talk to Emma, she got mouthy with me. Derek paused, gauging Mateo's reaction. The complete stillness of the man before him was more terrifying than any shouting or threats could have been. "So you beat an unconscious woman and terrorized her 8-year-old daughter," Mateo stated. It wasn't a question. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Sarah got between us when I was trying to teach Emma some respect. She started hitting me, scratching at my face, screaming like a banshee. I pushed her away, maybe a little too hard, and she fell and hit her head on the coffee table. It was an accident. And Emma? Derek's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She saw everything, started screaming and crying, saying she was going to call the police. I couldn't let her do that. I've got warrants, man. Unpaid child support, assault charges from my ex-wife. If the cops showed up, I'd be back in county lockup before morning. Mateo absorbed this information like a computer processing data. Every detail, every excuse, every justification Derek offered only confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was the behavior pattern of a predator who had been escalating his violence until someone finally stopped him. "So you chased a traumatized child through her own home?" Mateo continued. "You destroyed her sense of safety, her trust in the adults who were supposed to protect her, and you did it all to save yourself from facing the consequences of your previous crimes. When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it was." "No," Mateo said, finally allowing a hint of emotion to creep into his voice. "It sounds exactly like what it was." In the living room, they could hear Emma's soft voice talking to her unconscious mother. She was telling Sarah about the nice man who had come to help them, promising her that everything would be okay now, begging her to wake up so they could go get ice cream tomorrow like they had planned. The sound of that small voice, so full of hope despite everything she had endured, broke something fundamental inside Mateo. All the walls he had built, all the barriers he had constructed to keep the world at arm's length, crumbled in an instant. He thought about Isabella's final moments, how she had made him promise to help other scared children. He thought about all the years he had spent convincing himself that promise was impossible to keep, that caring about anyone would only lead to more pain. But Emma Peterson had proven him wrong. Her desperate text message had reached across the darkness of his carefully constructed isolation and reminded him who he used to be, who he could still choose to become. "Derek," Mateo said, his voice taking on a different quality entirely. "I want you to understand something. In my line of work, I've encountered every kind of criminal you can imagine. Drug dealers who poison communities, loan sharks who destroy families, contract killers who end lives for money. But you know what I've learned in all my years doing this?" Derek shook his head, too terrified to speak. "The worst monsters aren't the ones who kill for business. They're the ones who hurt children for pleasure." Mateo's phone buzzed, a text from one of his lieutenants checking on his location. He ignored it completely. Tonight, the business empire he had spent decades building seemed less important than the 8-year-old girl in the next room who had trusted a stranger to save her life. "Here's what's going to happen," Mateo continued. "You're going to walk out that back door and disappear from this city forever. You're never going to contact Sarah Peterson again. You're never going to come within 10 miles of Emma Peterson again. You're going to find a new place to live, a new job, maybe even a new name if you're smart." Derek's eyes widened with hope. This wasn't the death sentence he had expected. "But," Mateo added, and that single word carried enough weight to crush Derek's relief entirely, "if I ever hear about you laying hands on another woman or child, if your name crosses my desk in connection with any kind of domestic violence, if you so much as raise your voice to someone weaker than you, I will find you." Mateo leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely audible levels. "And when I find you, Derek Walsh, what I do to you will make tonight look like a gentle conversation between friends. Do we understand each other?" Derek nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. Good. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you walk away from this. Derek scrambled toward the back door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the handle. As he stepped into the darkness beyond, Mateo called out one final warning. Derek, the clock starts now. You have 24 hours to be gone from this city. 25 hours from now, if you're still here, our conversation continues. Permanently, the door slammed shut, leaving Mateo alone in the kitchen with the weight of his decision. He had let Derek live, but not out of mercy. He had let Derek live because killing him would have been the easy solution, the old solution. Tonight called for something different. Tonight called for the kind of justice that gave second chances while making consequences crystal clear. Mateo pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Dr. Elizabeth Chen answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Mateo? What's wrong? I need a favor, Elizabeth. A woman named Sarah Peterson, unconscious from head trauma, probably concussion. She needs immediate medical attention, but no questions asked, no police reports filed. Where are you? Mateo gave her the address. Dr. Chen had been his personal physician for 15 years, and she understood the unspoken rules of their arrangement. She treated his injuries, his men's injuries, and occasionally the injuries of people who needed help but couldn't afford to involve law enforcement. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. Is this connected to business? No, Mateo replied, surprising himself with the honesty of that answer. This is personal. After ending the call, Mateo walked back into the living room where Emma sat beside her mother, holding Sarah's hand and whispering gentle encouragement. The sight of her small figure maintaining such brave composure in the face of unimaginable trauma reminded him so powerfully of Isabella that he had to steady himself against the doorframe. Emma looked up as he approached. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. Relief, gratitude, trust. Is he gone? She asked quietly. He's gone, Mateo confirmed. He won't be coming back. Is Mama going to be okay? Mateo knelt beside Emma, bringing himself down to her eye level just as he had done with Isabella so many years ago. I've called a very good doctor. She's going to take care of your mama and make sure she gets better. Emma nodded, accepting this promise with the simple faith that children possessed before the world taught them to doubt. Matt, she said, using the name he had given her during their text conversation. Why did you come help us? You don't even know us. The question hit him like a physical blow. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that her desperate message had reached across decades of buried grief and reawakened parts of his soul he thought were dead forever? How could he tell her that helping her was really about honoring a promise he had made to another little girl who hadn't lived to see her 9th birthday? Because, he said finally, someone very important once made me promise to help kids when they were scared. Who was that? My sister. Her name was Isabella. Emma seemed to consider this seriously. Is she nice? She was the nicest person I ever knew. Where is she now? Mateo felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes for the first time in 25 years. She's in heaven, but I think she would have liked you very much. Emma reached out and took his hand with the same trusting gesture Isabella had used during those final moments in the hospital. The contact sent shockwaves through Mateo's carefully controlled emotional defenses. I'm glad you kept your promise to her, Emma said simply. In that moment, Mateo realized that everything in his life had been leading to this point. All the violence, all the power, all the fear he had accumulated over the years suddenly seemed like preparation for something larger. He had built an empire of darkness, but tonight, that empire had served the light. Car lights swept across the front windows. Dr. Chen had arrived with her medical equipment and her discretion intact. Soon, Sarah would receive the care she needed, and Emma would have her mother back. But Mateo knew that his involvement in their lives was just beginning, because for the first time in decades, he had found something worth protecting that had nothing to do with territory, or profit margins, or respect earned through intimidation. He had found a family that needed him. And perhaps more importantly, he had found his way back to the promise he had made to Isabella all those years ago. The promise that would transform not just Emma and Sarah's lives, but his own in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As Dr. Chen worked on Sarah and Emma watched anxiously from the couch, Mateo stepped outside to make another phone call. This one would set in motion changes that would ripple through his organization and beyond. "Vincent," he said, when his second-in-command answered, "I need you to arrange something. A trust fund, completely anonymous, enough to cover college tuition and living expenses for a young girl." "Boss? What's going on?" "I'm keeping a promise," Mateo replied. "And Vincent, clear my schedule for the next few weeks. I have some personal business to attend to." For the first time in 25 years, Matteo Ricci was putting family first, and the little girl who had sent a desperate text to a wrong number was about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected guardian angels come wearing expensive suits and carrying the weight of their own redemption stories. The night was far from over, but already everything had changed. Because sometimes it takes the courage of a child to remind a lost man who he was always meant to be. Meant to be. 6 months later, Emma Peterson stood in the doorway of her new bedroom, watching through sparkling clean windows as children played in the safe neighborhood Mateo had quietly moved them to. Sarah had recovered completely. Her bruises long faded, her smile returned. But the real transformation belonged to the man who had answered a desperate child's text message. Mateo visited every Sunday, not as the feared crime boss of Boston, but as Uncle Matt, the man who taught Emma chess and helped with her homework. He had kept his promise to Isabella in ways he never imagined possible. The empire he had built through fear now served a different purpose, protecting families like Sarah and Emma from the monsters that lurked in the shadows. Derek Walsh had vanished that night, just as Mateo promised he would. Word had spread through the criminal underworld about what happened to men who hurt children in Mateo Ricci's city. The message was clear and absolute, but the most profound change wasn't in Boston's streets or in the Peterson household. It was in Mateo himself. He had discovered that the hardest heart could choose love over revenge, that the darkest soul could find redemption in the innocent trust of a child who needed saving. Emma's desperate text had been sent to the wrong number, but sometimes the wrong number turns out to be exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, wearing expensive suits and carrying the weight of promises made to dying children. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove even the most broken hearts can heal when given the chance to protect something precious.